The issue of CPF took centre stage in Parliament today. Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam laid out the strengths of the compulsory savings scheme, how the government determines interest rates and why CPF members are getting a fair return. He also explained how CPF funds are invested and also how this has shielded members from any risk. At the same time, Mr. Tharman, who is also Finance Minister, provided details on how CPF interest rates are determined. He pointed out that these rates have a guaranteed floor and that these are well above comparable market investments for most members. Now, Mr. Tharman added that the government also subsidises CPF members through measures in the budget, and this could grow savings for a low-income member by 6% per annum in effect over his working life. Now, all those reports in detail tonight. Well, first, let's take a look at how CPF has worked for Singapore. Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam launched a stout defence of the scheme, saying it is financially sustainable and offers fair returns. Now, to make his point, Mr. Tharman compared the CPF scheme to other retirement systems around the world.
There's been robust debate of late over the effectiveness of the country's national pension scheme, with some Singaporeans asking how CPF monies are invested, if interest rates could be pegged higher, and whether there's a need for government to hold on to what some say is their hard-earned money. The Deputy Prime Minister put things in perspective.
Madam Speaker, there is a looming pensions crisis in most of the advanced countries, and the challenges remain largely unresolved.
The first challenge is financial stability. Mr. Tharman said in many advanced countries, the pay-as-you-go social security system has become unsustainable. As more citizens retire, the pensions promised become increasingly unaffordable, and the buck is passed to younger citizens through social security taxes. The second challenge is to give individuals a fair return on their retirement savings, but avoid exposing them to more risk than they can bear. As more countries struggle to cope, Mr. Tharman said the shift is to pension plans where the worker's savings go into his own account and he eventually draws the savings from there. The worker chooses his own investment plan and bears the risk. The problem is most individuals underperform in the market, and one may retire when markets are down and interest rates low.
I provided this background, Madam Speaker, to explain why our CPF system has worked well and provides a strong foundation for the future. It has protected members from risk. The scheme is aimed at meeting basic retirement needs. As many members have had relatively small balances, it has been right to shield them from risk. The CPF has also avoided imposing risk on taxpayers, unlike many countries where ordinary citizens face a much larger tax burden in future.
Now, Mr. Tharman acknowledged that the CPF is not a perfect system, but it's one of the better systems regarded internationally, and that the government has said that it will improve the system to give Singaporeans greater peace of mind during their retirement years. But in doing so, Mr. Tharman said the government should not lose sight of the basic strengths of the CPF system. So what are these strengths? Mr. Tharman said the system here is sustainable. There are no unfunded or sudden liabilities that will burden future generations. The CPF offers some flexibility for members to withdraw savings, for example, to pay for their homes with nominal out-of-pocket cash. And while the scheme does not offer the highest returns, Mr. Tharman said it's fair and one of the safest in the world.
Few systems offer the guaranteed floors on interest rates. 3.5% for the ordinary account, and currently 5% on the SMRA, this special account, retirement account, and Medisave account, for those with smaller balances. And they comprise the majority of members. And for those with larger balances, it's 1% less. The interest rates are guaranteed by one of the few remaining AAA-rated governments in the world.
On top of the guaranteed interest rates, Mr. Tharman said the government subsidises CPF members through the budget, for example, through housing grants and Medisave top-ups.
Well, expanding on that point, Mr. Tharman says most Singaporeans earn the full interest rate guaranteed for their CPF monies. They also get a fair return. Mr. Tharman made the point as he explained how the government determines CPF interest rates.
More than half of all CPF members enjoy the full 3.5% interest rate on their ordinary account, and 2/3 of members earn the full 5% on their special, retirement and MediSave accounts. The ordinary account, which can be used to pay for homes or education, has a guaranteed floor rate of 2.5 or 3.5% for balances of up to $20,000. Members can also earn more returns by transferring their ordinary account savings to the special account used for retirement and through the receipt of subsidies from the budget. This is targeted at low and middle income Singaporeans. Mr. Tharman said the subsidies amount to a significant boost to what the typical low income member earns on his balances. For example, on top of the 3.5% interest on his ordinary account, a low income earner gets workfare and housing grants. When he sells his home to upgrade or downgrade, the housing grant is returned to his ordinary account as part of his retirement savings. This will grow his savings by 6% per annum through the combination of CPF interest rates and government subsidies. But if the grants are amortized over his working life, he will see his savings grow by at least 2.5% per annum over a 30 to 40-year working life. Mr. Tharman said this does not include the ordinary account savings used to buy a home, which benefits separately from the appreciation in housing value. The Special Retirement and MediSave accounts, or SMRA, are treated as long-term savings and therefore pegged at 1% above the 10-year Singapore government securities. He said the government has maintained a floor of 4% on SMRA or 5% for balances of up to $60,000.
This is a fair system of returns for the SMRA. The CPF, in essence, pegs SMRA returns to long-term SGS, but it has also been paying a floor of 4% to 5% that is well above market rates in the current environment. As I explained earlier, we have shielded members from the risk of low market interest rates.
Now, Mr. Tharman noted that the CPF system is not static, and over the years, the government has adjusted the system to, for example, reduce the scope for housing withdrawals, with more emphasis on retirement and medical needs for old age.
Well, the government has also given the assurance that your CPF money is safe. It bears no investment risk and the returns that members have been promised are guaranteed. Mr. Tharman explains how this is possible.
On new priorities for Singapore.
It was perhaps one of the most detailed accounts of how CPF monies are invested by the government. Responding to questions from members of parliament, Mr. Tharman said the CPF board invests the monies in what's known as Special Singapore Government Securities, or SSGS. These SSGS bonds are guaranteed by the government, so the CPF board faces no risk of being unable to meet its obligation to its members.
This is a solid guarantee from a AAA credit-rated government. The AAA credit rating reflects Singapore's very strong financial position, with the government's assets comfortably exceeding its liabilities.
Proceeds from the issuing of the SSGS bonds are then pooled with the rest of the government's funds. These include proceeds from tradable Singapore government securities or land sales. The co-mingled funds are then deposited with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. The MAS then converts these funds into foreign assets. A major portion of these assets are long-term in nature and hence transferred over to be managed by Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, GIC. Mr. Tharman then went on to explain why CPF monies are safe through a combination of strategies and how the government protects CPF members.
Their monies are safe and the returns they have been promised are guaranteed. Neither does the CPF board bear any risk, regardless of whether the GIC's investments earn or lose money in any particular year. The risk is wholly borne by the government on its own balance sheet.
Mr. Tharman said the GIC manages proceeds from the Special Singapore Government securities along with other government assets and makes investments for the long term. This, he said, is an important distinction. It means that the GIC manages the government's assets as a pool, which include assets that are not matched by liabilities. This allows the GIC to invest in order to achieve good returns over the long term. Over the past 20 years, GIC's investments earn 5.2% per annum. Mr. Tharman added that CPF members are also shielded from risk because the government has been absorbing volatility in the markets through a substantial buffer of significant net assets.
Well, leader of the opposition, Lau Tia Kiang, rose to ask Mr. Tharman about the management of CPF monies.
He said that if CPF money managed and invest as an independent pool, it would not be able to enjoy the same investment return as GIC. I would like to know why is it so? And I understand we currently have about 300 billion CPF balance. Is the pool not big enough to be able to secure the same return and maybe better return?
If the GIC had to manage the CPF money and ensure that we are able to meet our full obligations on the CPF, that the capital is guaranteed, that the interest rates are guaranteed, and when market interest rates go down, we do not take the CPF interest rate down, but we keep it at the floor, a high floor, 3.5% on the ordinary account and 5% on SMRA. If those were the obligations that were required, first, there's no private sector fund manager that will take on that task because it is very difficult to meet. The GIC, because it has a large, diversified portfolio, does aim to invest for the long term and aims to do better than the SSGS obligations imply. But that is only because the GIC is not just managing SSGS obligations, is not just managing CPF liabilities. If it was managing CPF liabilities and SSGS obligations, where you must meet that obligation every year, it will need a very conservative portfolio, meaning not much equities, certainly no real estate, alternative assets. It'll be basically a simple bond portfolio, and it's not going to earn very much. It will aim to just minimize the chance of failure to meet obligations, not maximize long-term returns. Our strength is that the government has net assets, including unencumbered assets, proceeds from land sales over the many years, proceeds from the government surpluses, especially in the earlier years, and the investment returns on those proceeds. Those give us unencumbered assets. And by pooling the SSGS monies together with those unencumbered assets in one pool, we will be able to invest for the long term, aim for high returns over the long term that will beat the SSGS, we hope.
Now you can catch the full highlights of Mr. Tharman's speech and his response to MPs at 11 p.m. on Channel News Asia. Well, turning to the CPF minimum sum next. Over the past 10 years, there have been increases for each cohort of those reaching the age of 55. Manpower Minister Tan Chuan Jin explained why they are necessary and described the increases as a major planned and gradual adjustment. Now, Mr. Tan acknowledged that the various policy changes may have made the system hard to understand and went on to dispel what he called myths and misconceptions about the scheme.
The idea behind the CPF minimum sum is to be able to stream out the savings every month, as opposed to withdrawing it all at one go. It's a minimum amount for retirement expenses, and savings above that can be withdrawn. Once it's set for a specific cohort, the minimum sum does not change. For instance, for someone who turns 55 this year, the sum is $155,000. This is up from $148,000, the sum for someone who turned 55 a year before, or the $117,000 for someone 5 years older.
Some are unhappy when the minimum sum increases for every cohort that turns 55. Some see it as a shifting of the goalposts that locks up more and more of their CPF savings. Others do not understand how much savings they must set aside at 55.
Minimum sum increases, Mr. Tan said, are a planned and gradual adjustment to catch up with rising living costs. So why $155,000 monthly payout of about $1,200 in 10 years' time when the person turns 65? $1,200 is what the authorities estimate a lower middle-income household would need for daily life 10 years from now.
If you do not meet your minimum sum at 55, you do not need to top up the shortfall in cash, nor do you need to sell your property to make up that shortfall. What it means is that with a smaller amount, your monthly stream out would be correspondingly less, and that is all.
Only half the minimum sum needs to be set aside in cash. That's $77,500 for someone who turns 55 this year. Savings above this can be used to finance housing purchases or withdrawn if you pledge a property. Mr. Tan said policy changes over the years have made the CPF system hard to understand, especially when different rules apply to different age groups. But not changing the CPF rules would be irresponsible of the government.
Singaporeans are living longer. That is a reality. The things that retired households spend on have also risen in quality. The more we postpone the needed changes, the more disruptive the changes will be when it's forced upon us in future. Many governments do not embark on these changes and reforms because it may be unpopular, but it is not the right thing to do. We believe that it is our responsibility to make these changes when we can.
More Singaporeans have been able to reach their minimum sum over the years, Mr. Tan said. For CPF members who turned 55 last year, about half had their minimum sum in cash plus property. Authorities are optimistic that the majority of younger Singaporeans will be able to do this even as the minimum sum increases because of growing wages.
Well, 7 MPs sought clarification from the minister on various issues, ranging from how the adequacy of the minimum sum is determined to allowing greater flexibility in CPF withdrawal.
The House was told that the idea to peg the CPF lump sum withdrawal at age 55 many years ago was because the life expectancy was 5 to 7 years beyond that age. And the MP for Nee Soon GRC asked if a tweaked version of that idea is possible.
Can Minister consider giving option? That means working backwards. Now it's 82 years expectancy, so 5 to 7 from 82. Can they be given an option to withdraw money, lump sum? Because many Singaporeans would like to see lump sum and manage their own money.
Now, assuming you work backwards from whatever the life expectancy would be at that prevailing age, and therefore allowing members to take up a lump sum, we don't know how long each individual is going to live. But as a whole, individuals will live longer. The more you take out, the more you reduce that monthly payout that you have available, and are you able to stretch that for a long period?
Nominated MP Lawrence Lian asked how the government assesses the adequacy of the minimum sum and if the monthly payout of $1,200 the minimum sum produces is enough.
The concern is that for those where the minimum sum is adequate, they do not accumulate enough to have the minimum sum at 55. For those who meet the minimum sum, it's not adequate.
For a slightly below middle income family, on a monthly streaming payout, from the monthly payout basis, that's what we feel is would meet their basic needs. Now, does it mean that individuals survive solely on the minimum sum in itself? No. For many of us, you do have other forms of savings. Many Singaporeans own their housing, which is why housing remains a very important part of retirement adequacy.
MP for Ang Mo Kio GRC Seng Han Tong said the CPF scheme is a complicated one and asked if its communication on the ground could be enhanced. Mr. Tan said the CPF board is always seeking ways of communicating the scheme in a simpler way. It's also looking at improving the CPF website by adding videos and infographics of policies and pushing out more information on mainstream media.
The CPF is a very significant and important pillar. And it's important to have debates and discussions based on facts, based on what it is and what it is not, and not on speculation for whatever reason that individuals choose to distort this and create fear and anxiety.
Mr. Tan said while the system will not cater to every person's individual needs, it has provided for Singaporeans well.